know that I am dealing with some form of low grade depression, not just because of the quarantine, but because of the racial strife and just seeing this administration, watching the hypocrisy of it day in and day out is dispiriting.
We're joined now by Peter Kinderman, a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Liverpool. Great to have you on the programme. Welcome to you. How important is it to see high-level personalities such as the former First Lady Michelle Obama speaking out about depression, mental health issues?
I think it's fantastic and it's extremely important. For many years, mental health problems, psychological issues have been private, things that people worry about talking in public. There's a worry about stigma. So for high-profile people, and especially people that we respect and admire, to talk about psychological issues, to talk about their mental health, I think is fantastic. I welcome it completely, yes. I mean, it does depend on what people say, but I happen to think that Michelle Obama's comments are extremely helpful.
And what has the pandemic done to our mental health? What are some of the cases that you're seeing? And anecdotally, what are you hearing?
Well, I think that we've got three elements to this. We've got the worry about a life-threatening virus, which is obviously understandable and affects us all. I mean, some people possibly are not taking it as seriously as they might, but generally there's anxiety about the physical threats involved from a virus. Then there's the impact on our day-to-day lives of the lockdown, but probably the most important impact on our mental health will be the economic consequences. We've had, in most developed countries, we've had enormous changes to the economic fabric of the countries, and that will have an impact on our physical and economic well-being. And we know from previous recessions and so forth, from wars and strifes and other problems, that when there are financial and economic problems, then our emotional health suffers as a result of that. So I and other people are quite worried that if there's a major recession following this pandemic, that will have a major impact on our mental health. And that's important because, as Michelle Obama said, people are not becoming depressed because of some fanciful notions of brain disease or chemical imbalance. People are worried and depressed because the situation is worrying and depressing.
And how far-ranging would you say it is? I have a statistic here that a recent study found that the majority of American adults, 53%, believe the pandemic is taking a toll on their mental health. 53%. Would you say that's the same in most countries globally?
Yes, I think that's probably an underestimate. I mean, I think it would be slightly odd if you said that what's happening has had no impact on your mental health. It's clearly a depressing, worrying, frightening, complex, disconcerting situation. I think for people to say it's had no effect on my mental health is slightly unusual. The question is whether the impact on each individual's well-being is going to be significant enough that they start to have real problems. And I think when we're talking about that, I think we need to think about responses to the mental health consequences of this pandemic in terms of social and community and society-wide responses, rather than to think of it as an epidemic of individual mental disorders. This is a crisis that we as a global community have to respond to.
And going back to the comments Michelle Obama made, what do you make of when she says the issues of racial injustice and the frustration with the Trump administration were all weighing heavily on her mind?
I think that that's right. I mean, clearly for her, probably much more acutely than for the rest of us. But, you know, to be honest, people like myself from many thousands of miles away, we look at what's happening in America. We look at what's happening with the Trump administration. We look at what's happening with black people on the streets, both of America and in the UK. We look at the complete nonsense of the government that we have in the UK, and it is genuinely depressing. Now, whether the sort of mental health consequences of that, whether the depression and anxiety about our future, our children's future and our grandchildren's future is significant enough to start to mean that we have problems in getting about in everyday life, whether it's affecting our sleep, whether it's affecting our moods on a day-to-day basis, whether that anxiety and depression reaches a threshold that social workers or clinicians or psychologists would recognize as being a problem is a different matter. But I think, of course, it's depressing, and I completely agree with her. I also think that when we talk about significant mental health problems like anxiety and depression, we are talking about ordinary human emotions. And, for a Black woman at the center of policy making in America to see what's happening with other Black people faced with police oppression on the streets of America, it must be profoundly depressing. I think she's got it entirely right.
Great to speak to you, Peter Kinderman from the University of Liverpool. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.